Were you at the Eastern game?
Which one?
The Eastern SAC. Were you at that game?
No.
Welcome to, this is kind of a curveball, guys. This is the Big Sky Podcast Network Power Rankings, kind of. Patty Frakes is joining us from Cheney. He's got the Eagle sign in the background. Patty, how's it going?
Doing all right. We're here. We had weird, awkward intros, and we're back. We're talking Big Sky football.
It's weird because, like, hey, full disclosure, I know you guys don't give a shit, but I'm in nursing school, and, like, in short, the first quarter of nursing school, we're supposed to be like prepped to go out and work at a hospital, not kill anyone. It kind of kicks your ass. That quarter's over, but that's why I had to miss last week. That's why we're late this week. So, hey, maybe things get back to normal, but if we're recording late, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about games that feel not that relevant. So we're using the Big Sky Big Takes kind of approach here, where it's more broad topics. Yeah, we'll talk about the week that was, but we're mostly concerned about the week to come. So, hey, this is on Tubbs of Club. That means it is presented by Snake River Stampede Canadian Whiskey. So, all right, Patty, in case you missed last week, so we had 6 Big Sky games, 12 teams, 6, so no one's on bye last week. Just going to run through the game scores real quick. We'll go more in depth on teams when we actually get there, but this is just to get this part out of the way. So, hey, heading into this week, we had Montana beats NAU at their homecoming 31 to 20. Logan 5 throws for 199 yards, got quite a few touchdowns. We'll probably hit that later. Top 5 Portland State come from behind, beats Idaho State in Pocatello 42-38 behind, 6 touchdowns from Big Sky Offensive Player of the Week, Dante Sachere. Cal Poly gets their ass kicked at UC Davis 56-10. I'm not going to talk about anything there. What is there? Northern Colorado picks up their first win since 2022, beating Weber State 21-17. However, Weber fumbled away 2 touchdowns. Like truly lost 2 fumbles in the end zone. Either of those obviously wins that game. But there we go. Hey, Crew had 76. NOCO, holy smokes. Yeah, exactly, Crew had. So other than the Weber State, Northern Colorado, we got 2 more games. One a surprise, one kind of surprise, kind of not. So Eastern, maybe they're on life support. We'll get there later. They beat Sacramento State 35-28. Tuna Alta here, 102 rushing yards, kind of paves the way there. And now the surprising but not game. Most people pick Montana State to beat Idaho. Idaho playing a backup quarterback, right? Now, I don't think anyone picked 38-7. That was the score. Montana State completely dominates. Idaho gets a garbage time touchdown to just not get shut out. Probably more concerning for Vandal fans. Idaho loses. This is a little bit weird scenario. Idaho, so Jack Lane, starting quarterback for Idaho, broke his collarbone week 1 against Oregon. Jack Wagner, redshirt freshman, took over as starting quarterback. He actually lost that job to freshman Nick Josephek, who started against Montana State and broke his collarbone now too. So Josephek's out. Wagner, who had been the number 2 quarterback, demoted to 3, is now back to number 2 again. That's who's going to be rolling with Idaho for the upcoming week. And when we talk Idaho, because we'll probably hit Idaho for sure, that's going to matter. So, hey, that's the week that was. Now, this is typical power rankings, right? We're actually not going to run through the list. Now, Patty might be thinking, Brian, why is this called power rankings and why are we not running through a list? Well, I didn't send the link out, so no one voted. So we're just going to do the numbers differently. So we're going to go through this in tiers and talk topics, which is, the Big Sky Big Takes away. So Patty, I want you to kind of roll this part. The bottom tier of the conference, I think, hey, we're 3 weeks into conference play. I think there's about 5 or 6 teams that are completely interchangeable in the bottom of the conference, which is actually 5 or 6 teams is that's a really big bottom. But hey, 5 or 6 teams are interchangeable. Patty, you tell us, Who are the interchangeable teams first?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious bottom two that were the bottom two pretty much all year were Northern Colorado, Cal Poly, and I don't know. I think Portland State and Idaho State are in there with them too. All four of those teams have they've just been bad, man. And this Idaho State Portland State game this week was, I mean, it had some offensive firepower, but when you look at those teams' results against anyone else, like they've just pretty much gotten their butts kicked. Aside from, I mean, Portland State put up a nice fight with Davis, but also Davis was in the letdown spot. So I think those are our four interchangeable bottom tier teams that generally go ahead.
Well, no, hey, you hit those four teams. So hey, you're saying the bottom four in some order. You don't give a shit. Is Idaho State, Portland State, Northern Colorado, Cal Poly.
Yeah.
Now, all of those teams have one Big Sky win. Just funny bringing that up because Sacramento State, who is not in this bottom tier, sits at 0-2. Idaho, who's not in this bottom tier, sits at 1-2 as well. But hey, not all schedules are created equal. Of your four bottom teams, who to you is the most interesting team that could maybe spoil someone else's playoff aspirations, or for some reason the team is at least like 5% magnetizing to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be between Portland State and Idaho State.
You got to pick one. The question wasn't which ones. The question is which one. Pick one.
I'm gonna say Portland State. I think that, I mean, Dante Sachere is good enough to wish them to a game that they should have won a week ago, like we were just saying, or 2 weeks ago against Davis. I mean, they you watched the replay, they won that game. So I got to go with Portland State there.
See, I'm going to go with Idaho State. I shouldn't, because Idaho State's actually doing what I talked about in Big Sky, in the Tubbs the Club Big Sky conference preview. I picked Idaho State, I think like number 9 or 10, or 10, something like that, super low. The rationale being some of the optimism for Idaho State was based off of a couple fluky kind of things that don't necessarily translate to the team having turned things around. I'm still hopeful for Idaho State because to me, like, Portland State's not an interesting story because you're right. The Vikings should be at 2-0, but the rest of their schedule though, dude, like they've got Montana State. They have 2 potential wins on the schedule in theory, Sac State and Northern Colorado to close the season out. Other than that, like you're looking at, they've got Montana State, at Idaho, and they do get to host Montana, but that's going to be a de facto home game for the Grizz based off how many fans will actually travel. So I'm going to go with Idaho State. I probably shouldn't. It's just that I want the Idaho State story to be fun. They have a quarterback, Kobe Tracy, who's pretty, I think Kobe Tracy is pretty damn good. The issue for the Bengals is, and I thought another thing I talked about on the Tubbs of the Club preview, and Crewhead 76, Brian has a soft spot for ISU. Yes, I do. And I shouldn't. The Bengals in their Big Sky games have given up 37. It's hysterical to think of this. Their best defensive outing in the Big Sky is against Montana State. Gave up 37 to Montana State. Gave up 38 to Cal Poly, barely held on for a win at Cal Poly, and then gave up 42 to Portland State. So no, Idaho State cannot stop anyone, which I honestly, on the Tubbs Club preview I started bringing up was when I did a short interview of Cody Hawkins at Media Day and asked him for impact players. He did not name a single defensive player. And let's just say, I think it shows, but the reason I say Idaho State over Portland State is there's no hope. There's just no hope in Portland State because of structurally who they are. Idaho State, you can at least squint and imagine how that could be different. Cal Poly and Northern Colorado are just sad. Next year, I'm going to call this the playoff spoilers. So we already went through the bottom 4 of the conference. So now we have like kind of our middle, like not exactly middle, but not exactly like not the middle. So Patty, tell me, who are the teams that you don't think they're going to make the playoffs, but they can, these teams absolutely can spoil playoff aspirations. Honestly, one of them may have done so this week. So your middle-ish tier of the conference, Patty.
Yeah. So I mean, Weber's got to be in there. I think they've already kind of spoiled their own playoff chances with, I mean, losing to Northern Colorado. That's tough. But I'd say Eastern's in there. and probably Sacramento State. I'd say those are the three right now. I think NAU is right on the bubble between this tier and the next tier, but I'm going to leave them. I'm going to leave them out. I think your playoff spoiler.
Hey, how about NAU? If Pennington's out, are they in this tier?
If Pennington's out, I'd put NAU in this tier.
Yeah, by the way, Ty Pennington, starting quarterback for NAU, he was injured 2 weeks ago against Idaho, did not play against Montana. So NAU is kind of a floater until, which is an apt metaphor for what we're talking about. Let's just say, for NAU's sake, until we see Pennington, he's not there, and he didn't play last week. So if NAU's in this crew, sans Pennington, that's Northern Arizona, Eastern, Sac State, and Weber. You do get to pick 2 teams here, but you only get to pick 1 for each category. Of these 4 teams being in this tier, tell me which is the most disappointing, and which is the team that they can be disappointed, but they shouldn't be, because this is a fair place for who that team is.
Yeah, I mean, I think all three of the main 3 got like big teams that are in there were all teams that had pretty high expectations. I mean, Sac was a preseason top 10 team, and they're now looking pretty poor. I gotta say it's Sac State is the most disappointing team, just because they came in with the highest national expectations. They were a top 15 team coming into the year. I think the most disappointing has to be Weber State. Or excuse me, no. It's the most disappointing and the most interesting. Was that the question?
Yeah, or like the most like, hey, this fan base can be upset, but this is a fine place to be for this team.
I think that's got to be NAU, right? If we're putting them in this tier, I think it's got to be NAU. NAU didn't have much expectations preseason, but they've come out and look pretty good. So, I mean, if they don't have Pennington and this team finishes middle Big Sky, I think that's a positive sign with some of the things that we've seen. I mean, the defenses look very much improved. They look like, the quarterback obviously matters, but it's not like NAU 5 or 6 years ago where it's like, if they have a quarterback, they're okay. If not, they're bad. They're gonna be a middle kind of, a playoff spoiler type team. And I think they should be pretty happy that they're there right now, especially, first year head coach, right?
Yeah. So I mostly parrot what you're saying. I think that Weber State, on paper, the aspiration, like no one thought of Weber State as like a top 10 team, but with how the Wildcats finished last season, and Mickey Mental's not in his first year, like as you referenced, in Brian Wright at NAU, year 1, this is the transfer portal era where you got a new coach, like you can have huge roster turnover. You don't know what you're getting there. There's like NAU, even if they finish with a worse record this year than last year, because they were 5-3 in Big Sky play in Chris Balls last year, even if they finish at like 4-ish and 4-4, something like that, even though they look like they know what they're doing, and having Ty Pennington, honestly, that could have radically changed. The Idaho game. That was a close game 2 weeks ago, which we did not get to talk about in Moscow. And then this last week at Montana, maybe Ty Pennington plays there suddenly. Like that was still a competitive game. And I got to tell you, having seen NAU's backup quarterbacks in person, offensively, they're lost without Pennington out there. So yeah, NAU, all things considered, great. This is a great place to be. Weber State and Sac State, oddly enough, played this week. And I feel like the loser of that is the winner of this question of who should be the most disappointed. Both teams had playoff aspirations. Both teams it's kind of on life support. The Weber State, maybe I'm going to lean Weber State slightly more disappointing, because for Mickey Mental is a former offensive coordinator, and somehow the Wildcats just don't know what to do offensively. They're a team that look like they can beat anyone on any given day, but also completely get their asses kicked by anyone on any given day. And my reference point for that is 2 weeks ago. Weber goes to Montana, wins 55-48. Last week, losing at home to Northern Colorado, 21-17. So the same team that hung 55 in overtime on Montana couldn't put together 3 touchdowns against a team that has not won a game in before since 2022. We all thought that having Richie Munoz full-time at quarterback would really answer the question for the Wildcats offensively, but honestly, like it hasn't. And take out that 55-point outing against Montana. This is a team scoring like 23 points a game. So that's what I'm going to say for that tier. Our next tier we'll talk about after quick hitter from show sponsor Snake River Stampede, Canadian whiskey. Now, I know when Idaho got their ass kicked last week. We'll talk about that later. I did not celebrate that with a Snake River. But if you're going to celebrate anything, any win, hey, Northern Colorado, they were definitely pulling out their small batch 1915 edition, aged an extra 2 years, double barrel finish, first fill bourbon, and then finished in ex-Canadian rye whiskey casks. But even if you're in Northern Colorado, you could have celebrated with Snake River Stampede entry level, which, hey, it's double barrel finish, first fill bourbon, and Oloroso sherry casks. Both options are 3-grain whiskeys, 80% corn, 10% rye, 10% malted barley. Best Canadian whiskey buys in Idaho State Liquor Store. Grab yourself a Snake River today. Our next tier. So we have covered so far 8-ish teams, depending on how you want to talk about NAU. So our next tier, Patty, let's call this tier, and hey, there's going to be some gaps between here. Let's call these our should-be playoff teams. This is not the top tier, though, for your reference point. Who is in your should-be playoff teams bracket?
Yeah, so, I mean, right away, it's NAU with Chad Pennington. I mean, they are...
Ty Pennington.
Or what did I say?
Chad Pennington.
Wow,
NAU with Chad Pennington still might be pretty tough.
He was an
FCS quarterback in Marshall back when there was Division I AA. So
that is
actually, we're going to call that that was a deep cut.
Yeah, that was. I definitely knew the difference between those two names. Anyways, NAU is there. They're literally, I think they're right on the edge of the 2 tiers right now. And then, I mean, Idaho, Montana, Davis, I think are in. They all should be playoff teams. I think Idaho and Davis are more on the top end of that tier. I think Montana and NAU are more on the bottom end of that tier. It's kind of almost to me, it's almost enough to be 2 tiers, but those are the 4 clearly not top tier teams, but they should be in the playoffs.
Yeah. So of those 4 teams, and hey, we're for the first time hashtag producing in public, Patty, we're doing fine time wise, so we can hang out, talk about a couple teams. So let's we kind of covered NAU a little bit. It's like, hey, NAU big picture. I think they're pretty much solid across the board offensively and defensively, but I don't think they're elite at any phase of the game exactly. But hey, NAU is a good team. They look like they're well coached. They certainly don't really beat themselves unless you're playing Incarnate Word. Other than NAU, let's spend a minute talking about each team. I'm assuming you're like me and out of Idaho, Davis, Montana, you probably put Montana at last. Talk me through the case for and the case against Montana real quick.
I think the case for Montana is, they've always been known for their defense, and this is probably the best offensive unit they've had in a long time. You would think, hey, you tweak a couple things in the defense, which has been, not much short of awful this year. If they tweaked a few things, that could turn around into a team with a really high ceiling if that defense got playing really well. The case against it is just that the defense has been really bad this year. Teams have just been exposing. It seems like they're stubborn, dude. Like, this has been a storyline with Bobby Hauck coach teams for a long time. Like, you look at the Weber game, and they were just so stubborn, wanting to stick on their man coverage, and they just got torched. Gave up 55 points to a team that could only score 17 on N8 or Northern Colorado the next week. So, I think I just think the case against them is just they got to be flexible coaching wise.
Yeah, so offensively, Logan Fife, look, he got the starting job. He kind of took over starting job when Ayat went down with an injury. But I think the jury's in. Like, this team needs Logan Fife as quarterback. He's a threat. He's a threat to score both through the air and on the ground. Hey, evidence of that against NAU in the Grizz 31-20 win. Fife threw for a touchdown plus 199 yards. He also rushed for 3 touchdowns. So they've got that part resolved. And I think you hit the nail on the head, which is Montana's taken a gigantic step back defensively. And we just haven't talked about it that much. You've alluded to it. Believe you alluded to it on camera, or if not, we've talked about it in private. Alex Gubner is losing him is not the same as losing. Teams lose quality linebackers year in, year out, replace them. And for most teams, it's not that big a deal. Honestly, it's kind of like losing a high volume shooting guard in basketball, where like, hey, the dude averages like 18 points a game. You're terrified. Hey, how's the team going to score? Lots of teams do just fine. There's a lot of dudes who can do that role. Alex Gubner, no, like it's completely different. The Grizz are not getting the same type of pressure on the quarterback, and just stopping anyone has been kind of an issue for them. Hey, like I referenced for NAU, without Ty Pennington, that team is completely lost offensively, and they still made a game of it with Montana. Montana had to come from behind to win last week. So yeah. Now I will say, just to give some credit to the Grizz, though, in the same way that I don't think I think there are some people like you, Batty, thought Montana take a step back defensively, not this far step back. I don't think anyone thought Montana was taking this much of a step forward on the ceiling of what they can do offensively, because that team absolutely has some weapons. And Logan Fife, I think the team's better with Logan Fife at quarterback. And I just think that's how a team with, hey, like Junior Bergen, we've talked about him. He's a wide receiver, kick and punt returner, one of the best players in the Big Sky. But they've also got Eli Gilman as he's one of the best running backs. I don't think he's the best running back in the conference, but he's one of the best running backs. Nick Osmo is fine. It's a change of pace, not as good as Gilman, but also if Gilman's not carrying 30 times a game, he's probably not going to get hurt. So the Grizz have depth offensively. They're producing offensively in a way that is a little bit shocking. They're averaging 41.3 points a game in Big Sky play. So like that's honestly funny to think of it, because of Bobby Houck as the coach. They're kind of like an old school Eastern team right now. Whether if the offense can keep doing it, like that's a separate question. I only say that just because you're always concerned with Montana that Houck will want to dial things back. But hey, to be fair, in the Dalton Snead era, Houck let Snead cook. That's what those teams needed. So hey, I'm the coaching staff there is not dumb. I think they know Montana just needs to be able to hang 35 points or more on teams to win. Davis, the case for, the case against Davis.
I'll go case against first.
Sorry, let me say one more thing for Montana. If the case for is them making the playoffs, the Grizz already have 5 FCS wins, and they have a schedule that's going to be tough to not get to 8 or 9 with the next 2 weeks for the Grizz. They're off this week. Then they've got Northern Colorado and Cal Poly. So that's almost guaranteed to get to 7 wins. Then their final 3 are Davis, Portland State, Montana State. If they pick up one of those last 3, they're at 8 wins. A Grizz bubble team is in virtually any playoff scenario. So there's a case for Montana in the playoffs. Davis now.
Davis, I'll go case against first. They've just been inconsistent. I mean, they have a lot of talent on that team, at some of the better skill talent in the whole conference, in my opinion, with guys like Larison, guys like CJ Hutton, guys like Miles Hastings. But we've seen them, essentially lose a game to Portland State. We've seen them look really good against, Idaho. We've seen them look really good against, Cal Poly. But it's just kind of like they've just been inconsistent. And guess what that leads to? There might be a certain team that plays in Eastern Washington that has had Davis's number. And if you come up here and you're not 100% on, Eastern has been able to beat Davis every time they've played them, even when Eastern was clearly the worst team. If they're not on, like, this game this week could potentially be one that really hurts Davis's chances for a high seed that they're looking at right now.
Yeah, because they're 6-1. The Aggies are 6-1 on the season. They're 3-0 in conference. Now, I do want to bring up one thing talking about Davis. Aggies should be sitting at 1-2 in conference. Idaho coached themselves out of a win at Davis in like 5 or 6 different ways. And my understanding of the rule is, hey, dude, if the ball does not, even if your feet are touching the end zone as a receiver, if the ball does not cross that plane, it is not a touchdown. With that ruling, Davis should have lost to Portland State as well. So that's if those two things happen, we're talking about Davis in a very different way. But to be fair, hey, the win column for Davis doesn't care about how they got them. They got those wins.
Yeah.
I'm kind of with you hey, Davis is kind of a foil of Idaho in a way. Like Davis has some offensive weapons. Like they've had some injuries especially on the defensive side of the ball that took place earlier in the year. Not they're less of an issue now. Davis has gotten some of the breaks that Idaho has not gotten this season, which is why Davis is where they're at record-wise. But I think, look, it's going to be hard for Davis to not make the playoffs, but I think they're a team that has overperformed to get to 6-1. They're not. I don't think of this team as like, look, we just saw Idaho played both teams. So we can talk about Idaho at the same time while we're talking about Davis. Mm-hmm. The gap between Idaho injured backup quarterback and Davis is honestly that Idaho should have still won that game. And the gap between like Montana State and Idaho is something different we'll get to in a second. So I guess that's the barometer I use for Davis is they have some weapons. They're a good team for sure. They're a good football team, but they're not 6-1 good. They're like, there's some breaks and a pretty easy schedule up front has gotten them to where they are. You hit the nail on the head. This is a pretty big week for me. This is a pretty big week for Davis. Because to close out the season, they have 5 games left, and they get one for sure cupcake in Northern Colorado, but the rest are either good to okay teams with Eastern Montana, Montana State, Sac. So there's a world where Davis kind of could completely faceplant towards the end, and we're wondering are they a bubble team, whatever. Playoff wise, I didn't think they were a brain dead. Hey, this is a team that's going to have a bye in the first round. They're good. So they're good, but not great. Now, Idaho, the case for Idaho, the case against Idaho.
It's just case for good defense, case against bad offense. I think it's that simple with Idaho. Their defense has been awesome, but hey, Montana State didn't have any trouble moving the ball on Idaho, which was a huge shock to me. That could be a little bit concerning, but against anybody else, I wouldn't be concerned for Idaho's defense. I think it really comes down to, can Idaho score more than 20 points? If they can score more than 20 points, they're going to be in most of the games that they play. But
in 3 Big Sky games, Patty, how many touchdowns has Idaho scored?
It's got to be something really like 4.
It's not quite that bad.
It's been bad.
It's 7.
Yeah.
They've got 7. They're averaging. So like we've talked about, and this persisted this year, like part of Northern Colorado. Northern Colorado's problem is that they average like 12 to 14 points a game, depending on what time of the year you're talking about. Idaho in Big Sky Conference play, 18.7 points per game in three games. Just can't put it. They have not put it together. Now I'm a Vandal. You're an ex-Vandal. Well, like you're still a Vandal because you went to school, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Idaho's averaging 18.7. We know they're running with a backup quarterback, but we don't know when Jack Lane's expected to make it back for sure this season. Best information is Idaho will see Lane play, and the goal for Idaho is just pick up. Look, they've already made it through the harder part of the schedule. The back end of Idaho's schedule is completely different. So, like, hey, my case for Idaho is, they sit at 4-3, should be 5-2. They should have beat Davis, but they didn't. So Idaho sits at 4-3, 1-2 in Big Sky Conference play, should be 2-1. That's off the roughest schedule in the FCS of the 2 FBS games plus 5 ranked FCS teams. The second half of Idaho's schedule starting this week is where it really lightens up. Idaho has Cal Poly this week. Eastern has now turned into a maybe that's more of a toss-up game. I won't call it a 50-50 game, but I think week one that looked like Idaho 99, like a 99% Idaho win to 1% Eastern. I think it's shifted now up to like 75-25 or 70-30 of like who you would predict to win that game out of Idaho or Eastern. For the Vandals, good news, it's at home. Then they close out the year with at Portland State, hosting Weber, then at Idaho State. 3 of those feel like they, for a fact, should be wins. And then like Eastern and Weber, that's slightly, whatever. We don't need to parse too much in Idaho's schedule. You guys get the gist. The second half is a lot easier. There's not any ranked games in that second half. But the Vandals, they're just not moving the ball at all. And it was against Montana State. That was the big issue. When the Vandals have scored, for the most part, they've had to rely on big plays to really move, which is not what Jason Eck has done in the previous 2 years, but the talent's different. So Idaho is relying on big plays to get those points. The good news is defensively, the Vandals are really good in spite of getting their asses kicked last week at Montana State. Still have the number 4 scoring defense in Big Sky play, and that's also with the team being a little bit beat up with that opening 7-game run. So I think Idaho, it's kind of they're the most nerve-wracking of these 3 because their games are so low scoring, and until what lanes back, the quarterback position, they're just Idaho's going to out quarterback no one. And I don't care what team you're talking about. That's just the reality of playing a third string quarterback. Is there's no team who Idaho's going to have an advantage with passing the ball, and other defenses are going to know that. But the Vandals they've been able to hold good teams to not that many points. You got to expect they can hold some not that great teams to not that many points. Now, before we hit our top team, Patty, do you want to talk any more about Idaho?
I don't have a ton more to add. I mean, we seem to know what Idaho is, and I think we're really just awaiting for Lane to return to see what the true ceiling of that Idaho team is with, Lane running the show rather than a backup quarterback. Because, hey, when that dude's back, I think the ceiling of this Idaho team goes from right now looking like a 10-ish seed area that all of a sudden makes Idaho kind of like, it makes me think of South Dakota State a few years ago when they didn't get a top 8 seed and then they ran all the way to the semifinals. So that's the kind of team that Idaho, I think, turns into for me once they get a little bit healthier.
Yeah, see, and that I'm glad you brought that up, because for Idaho, defensively, they're a little bit beat up and they're wearing down. But if you give the Vandals even a league average offense, which the Vandals do not have a league average offense right now, they're averaging 18 points a game. If this were a lot of other teams, different years, we would be making fun of a team that scores 18 points a game. So give Idaho a league average offense. Suddenly the defense gets a little bit more rest. And they're 4-3 on the toughest schedule in the entire FCS, while they're barely able to score the ball. If they can move the ball at all, if they can get back to having any sort of ability to have sustained drives, suddenly this is a different monster. Is it a monster that could, if we replayed Montana State, I'd predict a win? No. But if you give Idaho a league average offense, to me, they're brain dead, the top of the Idaho, UC Davis, Montana, group of 3 that we just talked about. The thing for the Vandals, though, is if they're going to host a playoff game, they probably have to win at least 2. They have to win out if they're going to host a playoff game. And the Vandals probably have to pick up at least 2 more wins without getting much out of the quarterback. Pauly shouldn't be a problem. Eastern, it's hard to tell. They're looking frisky. I mean, honestly, if not this week, but next week, Idaho's playing an Eastern team off of wins, against Sac State and Davis. Now we're starting to talk about that as being, essentially your game of the week and something that you should give a little bit extra attention to. Now, before we hit Montana State, we have to talk about show sponsor, Hughes River Expedition, who's been sponsoring the show forever. So if you're looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, don't look past your backyard. Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal owned and operated since 1976 and are ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River of no return, the Salmon River Canyons of the Selway, and check out special trips like the one to see the Perseid meteor shower. Camp on pristine beaches, run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, and fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the country. You just bring her close, let HRE handle the rest. So grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now at 406-540-4450 or check them out at hughesriver.com. Montana State. Hard to overstate what the 7-0 Bobcats did against Idaho. I mean, like we've talked about, it's 38-7 win. I felt like within 3 plays of Montana State having the ball, it was clear who's going to win that game. Montana State. Well, I'm not going to answer this question. This is your question. Can you describe to me, was it shocking? Was it not surprising? Was it jarring to see the difference between Montana State and even the rest of the good teams in this conference?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a lot of we both are in the Idaho world. We saw a lot of Idaho fans be like, geez, maybe we kind of suck. To me, watching that game, it was, oh shit, that is a different level beast. That team is a top 3 national looking team rather than just a good Big Sky team. Because I mean, one of the bigger issues last year for Montana State was, I mean, that their defense was, it was a good defense, but they just were susceptible to certain styles of offense. And I mean, we saw that in the Idaho game. I mean, Montana State was probably the more talented, better team, but Idaho was able to just kind of scheme their way and win that one. When I look at this Montana State team this year, they have seriously, watched the film last year. They looked at, hey, this is our weakness. A lot of teams that like to throw the ball short and nickel and dime down the field, they tend to be able to move the ball on us. What's their adjustment been? A lot more aggressive playing, a lot more of an aggressive style. And it's worked really well for them. They just look bigger. They look faster. They look better defensively. Offensively, Tommy Mellott has been the best version of Tommy Mellott we've seen so far this year. And I don't know if we've even really seen him hit or really like reach his full usage. Like we saw glimmers of it in the Idaho game, but like they haven't really turned him loose on the ground 100% yet. I mean, and that's, you got to expect, maybe we see that in the playoffs. He's been doing a lot more with his arm behind, again, like the Montana State offensive line, who, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, they're still missing one of their best linemen, has looked like one of the best front 5s in the country. So, I mean, that Idaho game to me, watching it just from a national perspective, was oh crap, because that Idaho front 4 is one of the best nationally, and Montana State just dominated. So, I mean, I just, watching that game, I think it was kind of a statement game, put the nation on watch. Oh, Montana State's for real. They haven't just played a cupcake schedule and are okay. They're really good.
Yeah, to me, the eye test completely matches the stats that you see out of Montana State, which is they're the best, or they're just barely not the best scoring team in the conference. They put up 43 points a game. They're easily the best defense as far as like points allowed. Like they're giving up 13.7 points a game in 3 Big Sky games. And then on the ground, they're giving up 89 yards rushing a game on 3 yards per carry. And if you told me those stats and then watch the Idaho game, I'd say, no, dude, that completely makes sense. That defensively, Montana State is strong and fast. They're also like, hey, like you said, they're more aggressive this year than last year. And then look, Idaho's got their front 4 defensively, like you said, they're real good. Now they're a little bit beat up, but Montana State ran all over Idaho. And the other thing too, with how they use Tommy Mellott, because they're not running Mellott nearly as much as they had in the past. Now, when he does rush, there's often like there's more misdirection on the few design runs he gets. which kind of makes Malott a home run threat all the time because, by the way, you're worried about Scott Trey Humphrey just running through your team, which Scott Trey Humphrey, he looked good, especially early against Idaho. Again, like I said, first 3 plays for Montana State offensively, I thought this game is over. The thing that is just insane to me is I don't need to go much further describing how good this team is running the ball. But Tommy Malott has developed as a passer. He's connecting on 66% of his passes in Big Sky play. So they can beat teams both through the air and on the ground. They obviously are going to go to work to beat teams on the ground first. But there's a lot of boxes Montana State checked. So my takeaway is there's a pretty big gap between Montana State and then the next tier of the conference. Montana State, they kind of feel like they're a Final Four team. I have no idea how the Bobcats won't be a Final Four team in the FCS playoffs. The other 3 we talked about, like they have chances of hosting in the first round, but you can also see the ways where they don't. But that's the difference. Montana State, they're playing to host through the semis, and honestly, I think there's a very good chance that is what happens with that team because they're pretty damn good. So now I want to talk just for a few minutes now about the week to come, Patty. After reminding people, subscribe to patreon.com/Tubs of the Club. Join the hashtag only Tubs Discord. The long week, guys. So the Discord is honestly like the best place to me to chat Big Sky football, especially Idaho football online. It's going all just wire to wire, especially on road games. But like it's a pretty big community. Talks to other teams too. So it costs as little as a cup of coffee to support the show. Patreon.com/Tubs Club, and check out Substack for Tubs of the Club at thetubstack.com, written by Jeff Liedeker. Patty, you've been contributing over there too with Patty's picks every single week. Part of why we talked about tiers is because it's been tough to pick with so many interchangeable teams at the bottom, like we said earlier. But yeah, another way to support the show. So looking at the schedule of games to come this week, Patty, I guess tell me, I'm not thinking necessarily like marquee or sexy in terms of like TV. Tell me, what game do you think is the single most important as far as sorting out the conference?
I mean, when I look at this, I think it's Davis at Eastern. I mean, you have a couple games that'll probably be close, but I think Davis is the team that I think playoff wise, the playoff potential teams in the Big Sky kind of, I mean, Sack and Weber, right? I mean, they think that they can make the playoffs, but I mean, they don't have the math to do it right now. I think Davis is the one playoff team that, they don't, maybe the eye test doesn't totally make you think, hey, that's one of the best teams in the Big Sky. Eastern's had their number. I think this could be a pretty dang close game. I mean, I think the Eastern UC Davis game might be game of the week in the Big Sky, both in terms of figuring out the conference and in terms of just being the most fun. It probably will be the closest game in the conference. We'll see. Sack Weaver could be close, but I'd say Eastern at Davis, or Davis at Eastern, backwards.
So I'm going to steal a point from some dude named Patrick Frakes, who says Eastern is about 4 plays away from being 5-1. Yeah. Even with like the Eagles are 2-4, their playoff hopes aren't dead yet. I honestly think that if this Eastern team, now they got to turn around right away, which they already did with the win at Sac State. That's a ranked win. If this Eastern team can lose one more, and if that loss is Montana State, now they'd have to run the table otherwise. I think an Eastern team that's 7-5 with wins over Davis and Sac State and Idaho is probably a playoff team, or at least they're into their. It would be hard to look away from a team who had those wins and finished this like second half of the season as hot as the Eagles in this theoretical world would have. Now they got to pick up the win. So I think you're right as far as sorting out for Eastern's sake, and also for Davis, because you and I both, we're not down on Davis, but I think it's pretty clear we're not that hot on Davis, as in, again, like they're good, but like they're could easily or should have 2 more losses on that schedule. The other game I'm going to point to is, and this doesn't have quite the same impact because Sacramento State is their playoff. Look, I mean, they're pretty much they're close to playoff life support as well. I don't know if Sacramento State can even afford to lose another game, sitting at 2-4, which is an 0-2 in Big Sky play with the schedule that they've had. I mean, I think Weber State, Sac State, the loser of that, it's going to be pretty tough for those teams because whoever loses that game, you'd say for a fact, playoffs are pretty much done.
Yeah,
for these teams, you can probably tell yourself, hey, if we run the table, maybe, like, hey, if Sac State leaves 0-3, then I mean, I think you just say the team's lost. And that's kind of how the Hornets have felt, especially since conference play started. Like we spent time talking the preseason how, hey, Sac is they're absolutely destroying teams. They're getting a ton of penetration. They're just racking up TFL after TFL. But the Hornets haven't been able to put it together in Big Sky play, and especially like, hey, offensive side of the ball, man, they're not scoring that well. We talked about Idaho averaging 18.7. Sac State's at 22 points a game. Like and I don't think Sac State should be a great offensive team, but you can explain Idaho being where they're at on third string quarterback, right? Like that makes sense. That's not Sac State. That team, they're just not putting it together. And it feels like if they don't do it against Weber State, they're probably not going to. With the inverse, I mean, the inverse scenario applies to Weber's. They're a team that can score 55 or 17, depending on who shows up offensively.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Hey, Ron Lowney in the comments section, you're honestly part of why we recorded, Ron. I want to make sure you didn't think I was ducking Montana State attention after Idaho got their asses kicked by the Bobcats. So I know I just didn't work for my schedule. Ron, good to see you there. And hit the comments section. And hey, you guys can throw in the comments section what's the most important game this week. So Patty goes with Eastern Davis. I kind of said Eastern Davis, but also said the Sacramento State Weber. It feels like whoever loses that game, their season is effectively done. So
I think the Idaho State NAU game could be a little bit frisky, just in the sense that, I mean, if NAU drops that game, all of a sudden they go from a borderline playoff team to probably dropping a tier back down to the playoff spoilers. But if Pennington's back, they should walk all over Idaho State. But we'll see.
Yeah, no, dude, I think that's fair. I think that the Idaho State, I think, is kind of an important point too, in that, I mean, look, you and I didn't think of Idaho State as a playoff team by any means. Losing to Portland State was tough, and almost losing to Cal Poly was honestly like rougher to me in some ways. Was rougher than losing to Portland State, but doing those things back-to-back weeks was more of the reality check of, like, the optimism in Pocatello. Like, I'm happy it's there. I'm not going to make fun of it or anything like that. But maybe there's not as much of there as we would have hoped in the second season. But like the story is the same: is if the Bengals can't stop anyone, then they just have to score a shit ton of points. They're like a less talented Montana. As far as that game goes. All right, Patty, dude, we actually cruised through those rankings in a kind of fast fashion. We'll be recording the main show tomorrow, 6:45, talking Idaho at Cal Poly, which is to say, probably not actually talking Cal Poly that much, more talking about like a reality check for Idaho. We gave you the short version of the reality check for Idaho this week. Patty, anything Big Sky related that you have burning inside you we haven't gotten to? We've got a few minutes. We usually don't. We're usually like trying to slam through and get this done in under an hour. We're cruising.
Yeah, honestly, like, this feels very Homer-y, but I think Eastern is kind of a weird story in the Big Sky this year, in the sense that like I said, this team is four or five plays away from being a 5-1 team, despite how frustrating it's been if you're an Eagle fan. I mean, Eastern lost to freaking Drake. Eastern lost to Southeastern Louisiana, which that loss is looking slightly less bad as the season goes on. I mean, this Eastern team has shown a lot more potential on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, versus Drake, versus CeeLo, versus Nevada.
Nevada just beat Oregon State.
Yeah, I mean, all of Eastern's losses are starting to look a little bit better. The Montana game, I mean, the Montana loss hasn't necessarily aged quite as well, but again, like this Eastern team has been it feels like almost the same team the last like 3 years, as in like they can beat anyone any day, they can lose to anyone any day, and they have the talent to be a really good team, but they're being held back by something or someone or something. But it's just like when they have a good matchup, Eastern's been able to win those games. I mean, Sac State, for whatever reason, I mean, I thought Eastern was going to get kind of shut down by that Sac State defense, and Eastern could move the ball with ease. So, I mean, if you get a weird matchup with Eastern, weird stuff can happen. And I think if you're UC Davis, this is kind of a weird matchup, as in, I mean, Eastern has looked this last week. Eastern looked slightly less horrible defensively. I mean, they didn't look good, but they switched some things up schematically, and they looked a lot less. It's a lot less big plays that are hurting Eastern. And if you roll that into, I mean, an Idaho team that has looked really bad offensively, you roll that into a Davis team, Eastern has a shot to be kind of frisky this year.
No, it's like, hey, I want to hit the comment section. Crewhead76 saying Sac Weaver's most important, followed by Eags Davis. Ron Lowney saying he's picking Eastern for the upset over Davis. And another thing for Ron Lowney saying, he says you, meaning Eastern, has the talent. I want to talk about this from the Idaho end. Because for Idaho, like, to maintain that hope of getting a first round bye, the Vandals season is a playoff at this point. Vandals have to win out if they're going to have a chance to host a first round game, or host a second round game and skip out on the Thanksgiving week games, which is what, we're absolutely I'm absolutely hoping for as a Vandal. I'm looking at that Davis game and saying, Davis, please win this, because we want the Vandals are going to want Eastern to come in as demoralized as possible. An Eastern team that now believes in itself and knows it's probably it's playing for Coach Aaron Best's career in Eastern. That's different. That's the kind of team who you could understand them starting to take that step that earlier they weren't. Where, like, as you brought up, the losses don't look as bad. Some of them the losses shouldn't have happened, some of them, but it doesn't look as bad today as it did a couple weeks ago. And then you look at the Idaho end, where until Jack Lane's back, like, this team just doesn't. If they're playing a competent defense, like, the team's just not putting up points. That's how they've been. That you can see that being a tough matchup in a couple weeks, but we gotta get through this week before we look ahead to next week. So, hey, thanks for joining us. I don't know if you guys like this version better. There's some ways where I like this version better, but on an average week, I can't record a Tuesday night all the time like this. So we'll see how this evolves heading out. Thanks for joining us. Until next week, as we always say on the show, Patty.
Go Eags.
Jesus Christ. No. Go Vandals. Go whoever the hell your team is. This is a full Big Sky Conference show, right? So, as it always is, I'm closing the show, filibustering, because I don't know where in God's name anything is. We'll see you guys next week sometime.